Hi, everyone. Thank you, Julia. My name is Tarfa. I'm a research scientist at Google Research, and I'm really happy to be with all of you today. Are you seeing my screen? Perfect. All right. I'm here to present to you our work in evaluating how people find data sets online using a dataset-specific web search. I believe the reason why we're all here today is because more and more data are available online, whether it's from governments, companies, nonprofits, academics, and so on. And more people are using them for projects and research. As we all know, there are tens of millions of data sets online hosted on thousands of websites, yet finding the right data sets is still very challenging. As a result, many dataset search tools and platforms have been developed to facilitate dataset discovery. And most of these dataset search tools have either too small of a scope, like dataset repositories that are limited to datasets in specific disciplines or institutions, or too wide of a scope, like the general search web engines, where the results cannot easily be filtered to only datasets. And given the increased number of dataset discovery tools and the need to use them, several previous research has examined how dataset seekers find, evaluate, and use online datasets. Now, to evaluate how users find datasets online, which is kind of like the focus of our research, these dataset discovery studies used four main methods. And these methods are user interviews, surveys, log analysis, and tool reviews. Now, as you can probably tell or see here, there's an obvious gap in the user studies for dataset-specific web search, possibly because, to the best of our knowledge, there's only one current implementation of a dataset-specific and discipline-agnostic web search tool, and this tool is Dataset Search, which was developed by our team at Google Research. Now, Dataset Search is a specialized search engine that enables users to find datasets on the web by indexing all the pages on the web that have semantic markup indicating that the page is describing a dataset. The approach is really similar to other vertical search engines, like, for example, Google Scholar for academic papers. Now, Dataset Search differs from other tools or dataset discovery tools because its scope is any dataset page on the web. The scope is basically the union of the scope of metadata or dataset meta portals, repositories, and other dataset pages outside of these tools. And despite the many studies on how well other tools work to find datasets, no study has looked at how well a web-scale dataset-specific tool like Google Dataset Search meets user needs. Like, for example, how well does Dataset Search support user needs for dataset discovery as the only dataset-specific web search tool? And what are the advantages and challenges do users face when using Dataset Search, mainly due to its uniquely large scope and open approach? And to address these questions and fill the gap from previous studies, we conducted user interviews. Now, it's important to say that although the previous user studies are not about dataset specific web search tools, their findings are definitely relevant and they did inform our study design. Now, for the user interviews that we conducted, we recruited 20 participants using a database of volunteers for user research across Google and through LinkedIn and the COVID tracking project Slack channel. We did send a screening survey asking them about demographics, profession, and how frequently those respondents search for datasets. For the user interviews, we required that respondents search for datasets at least once a month. Our participants come from different backgrounds, as you can see, and they vary on how frequently they searched for datasets. Now, our findings correspond to three main themes, and these themes are building a mental model of the tool, making sense of heterogeneous data sets, and learning how to search for data. I will be going over each one of these in the next couple of slides, and I will be presenting the challenges and recommendations based on our observations, based on the user study that we conducted. So for building a mental model of our tool, we noticed that participants adjusted their understanding of the tool based on their experiences with other tools that they're familiar with. By the end of the interview, all participants aligned their mental model with dataset search functionality through the experimentation that they conducted. We observe a couple of challenges here. The first one is how dataset search differs from Google Web Search and why they are separate tools. The second challenge is related to user expectations about the scope of the tool and the relationship between datasets and other artifacts on the web. After the study, we partially addressed these challenges by integrating results from dataset search directly into Google Web Search for some of the dataset queries. In addition to that, dataset search links some of their datasets to scientific articles in Google Scholar. The last challenge here is the relationship between dataset search results and the links to dataset pages. Dataset search collapses identical replicas of the same dataset from different sites in one results with multiple sources, as you can see in the blue buttons on the screenshot. But participants were not sure which links to click or if all the different links are identical datasets. Dataset search actually doesn't really clarify that all these datasets are identical to each other, and the tool doesn't show which replicas is the primary source versus the derived versions. After the study, we implemented the versions functionality that clusters all the version of the datasets into one results, hoping that will clarify some of the confusions between the replicas and the different versions of a given dataset. Another finding from our study is making sense of heterogeneous datasets. Participants did confirm findings from previous studies on the limitations of dataset metadata. We observed three main challenges here. The first one is the shortcomings and inconsistency of dataset metadata. A couple of things our tool can help with. And these are allowing the user to control what to view from the dataset metadata and potentially maybe infer the missing metadata fields for these datasets. The second challenge is being able to view and download the underlying data. Dataset search originally only showed the metadata of the datasets, but recently we are also showing previews of the underlying data in dataset search. The last challenge here is how users can build trust in unfamiliar data sources. A couple of things could help with this, like providing signals about the trustworthiness or maybe the quality of the data sources, or possibly show more context about these data sources to users. Last finding from our user study is learning how to search for datasets. As we all know, dataset searching requires data literacy and domain knowledge, and some participants were unfamiliar with some of the concepts in dataset discovery tools, like, for example, data formats and usage rights. A recommendation that came from our participants is to create more educational materials to help novice users, and maybe materials in-tool information about licenses and data formats and so on, which we provide in our tool currently. Finally, our study has several limitations, and I'll go very quickly on a couple of them. First, dataset search is the only tool in dataset-specific web search category, so we couldn't really compare it to similar tools. We also explained the tool using metaphors with more familiar tools like Google Scholar or Google Web Search, which may have primed the participants to think about the tool in a certain way. Another limitation is our participants had different experiences levels with dataset discovery, which definitely translated into different approaches during their interviews. And lastly, participants used different queries rather than performing specific tasks. While this approach made it harder to compare our findings between participants were more invested in the task and had better context to interpret the results because the query was about something that they care about and knew about. Thank you so much for listening.